It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! Jumping right in, much to cover today. Starting with Mondays. Momo Mondays are rapidly becoming my favorite segment of any week just because of the nature of the comments. People, instead of just attacking my position, thanks Loki, that's Loki's comment, instead of just attacking my position, no, you're wrong, people respond to the videos I make by sharing something of themselves. And it is so giving and so risky in some way that it's an amazing thing. It's really like overwhelming in a positive way to see people sharing these, really personal stories. And I think it's, really healthy. It's a supportive comment section, which is really good. And one commenter just totally kicked me in the feels, made me feel so much empathy for them because they were very honest in response to the video I did on why some people may insult others by saying they deliberately insult some other people to make them go away. Because if they make these people go away, then the mean things that are being said to them stop. And they actually said in the comment that it wasn't enough to just ignore these people, to just mute them or whatever, because they'd continue to say mean things about them, even if they weren't talking directly to them. And this is an environment, this is a textbook example of an environment where people's individual boundaries and respect for human beings as individuals are not respected. And this is precisely the stuff that, I talk about a lot, about this boundaryless culture that many people inhabit. The way I sort of related to it, I immediately felt like, oh God, it's one of those comments where I just wish I could just stage an intervention and make this person's environment better, because that's terrible. That's a monstrous environment. Like, in a just world, people would be able to go in there and just fix that shit. And it is possible, but in a lot of places, management is so bad and so unconcerned with employees and students and all that stuff that it doesn't get done. That is an unacceptable environment. But that's some environments, and sometimes people cannot get away from them. The other thing that this made me think of is I hear a fair bit lately people say, you really don't like compliments, do you? And that's not true. I love compliments. Who doesn't like compliments? What I don't like is the experience that happens far too often of one compliment is followed by 4 or 5 criticisms or insults. And that happens a lot because people learn the sandwich method of communication, where you start with a compliment and then you criticize and then you end with something positive. And so there are a lot of people who will only compliment you if the next thing out of their mouth is a criticism. Instead of understanding the reason for constructive criticism, they manipulate the tool to do what they really want, which is just get you. Just, you're not perfect. You're not better than me. All this stuff. I'll get you, my pretty. It's not worth in these environments sometimes saying you like something, because people just live to crap on stuff. And this is why, like I said, I like compliments from a lot of sources. I'm kind of distrusting of them because they tend not to be sincere. They are a smokescreen for what the person really wants to say, which is nasty, because it's like, you're really smart, but you're this and you're that and you're this and you're that and you're I mean, it's this whole list, right? It just unleashes the beast. And that's when I kind of go, you're not someone I want to talk to anymore. And it's a particular thing for me just because it happens so often. joys of living in the entertainment industry is that you spend your life in a near constant review process. And it's not just about your on-screen output. It's your clothes. It's every statement you make in some sort of public forum. It's you do a hosting gig and it's not properly contextualized and a clip puts on the internet and people ascribe motivations to it that were only allowed to flourish because it was taken completely out of context. And you can never quite tamp that down. You can never quite undo the damage that sort of maliciousness causes. And it's a really surreal way to live because it makes you very grateful for the times that people do get what you do. Because you come not to expect fairness, or at least I don't expect fairness. I will give it my best shot. I will be as fair as I possibly can be to other people, but I absolutely do not expect fairness. It's just an unreasonable expectation in my line of work. The whole industry on down, from production models to monetization models to contracts, just they're not fair. Content creators get screwed. And so part of the reason I do Momo Mondays and stuff like that is just to do something good with what I have. Do something that is the reason for doing it is the doing it. You don't have to worry. I don't have to worry about money on those segments. I don't have to worry about, popularity. The comments that I get in those make the process itself worth doing. I feel like I'm doing something of value in those segments. And those are super important because when things get really stupid, it's a way to refocus. And so I want to move on from that because the next comment I want to address, and I wish I could get to all the amazing, passionate, lengthy, content-filled comments that happened this week. There are just too many, which is a great problem to have, don't get me wrong. But there was one particular comment on the video I did on the Women's March. And before I get into that, I want to say that was far better received than I thought. I was expecting to just get bombarded with outrage on that one, because when you take a nuanced approach and, actually provide a constructive, balanced look at something, you piss off people on all sides because you're not, glowingly just supporting one side or the other. And that's the way to get, 1 million followers on YouTube, is just be a steady stream of confirmation bias. And I don't want to do that. So it was very positive. I was very pleased to see a lot of people get what I was saying. But this one commenter, I'm looking at this comment as something that they really needed to say. It's something that's important to them. And so I want to talk about this comment, even though they kind of went full Macintosh and accused me of being harmful, spreading harmful myths about boys. And you guys know how I feel about harmful anything when it comes to media. An opinion is not inherently harmful. Actions are harmful. And, I smack down the Marxist feminist idea that Princess Peach is harmful or Bayonetta is harmful. And so I gotta be equally like, don't do that when the shoe's on the other foot. Don't accuse me of spreading harmful things about boys, because sex-directed education is still a thing. But this commenter talked about the whole idea of zero tolerance for violence, and obviously this person felt very picked on and not empowered to do anything about it. Their personal experience seems to be that they felt like teachers and administrators, this is a direct quote, act like they're there to teach the girls and discipline the boys enough to keep us from getting in the way of the girls learning. And I will say that I am not a fan of zero tolerance policies, period. Tolerance policies are very different than what I was saying. It was a completely different element of the stupidity that is modern pedagogy. But the reason I don't like zero tolerance policies is that they don't teach kids to learn from their mistakes. Mistakes are things to be avoided at all cost. And I get that people freak out about violence, and kids shouldn't be afraid to go to school for fear of getting beat up. But I know there were a couple times that I just let people physically beat me up because it wasn't worth fighting back, because then I'd get in trouble too. And I know what that does to a person, not feeling like you can fight back because the system doesn't allow you to fight back. So it doesn't just happen to boys. The thing I think needs to happen, and this is, in our litigious society, I don't think it's going to anytime soon, but it would be great if it did. Instead of zero tolerance policies, if kids end up fighting, it's mandatory mediation and mandatory counseling, because that will address any potential mental health issues, any potential interpersonal stuff at a very young age, where the success rates are much higher when you get to it earlier. Now, this means funding, because it means having a counselor in every school, and an actual counselor, not that joke that we're all sort of familiar with in terms of high school guidance counselors. I was fortunate enough to go to school where one of the guidance counselors actually had a psychology degree. And so he was pretty cool. But the sooner you get people into some sort of, mental health practice, healthy, it's just like exercise for the body, exercise for the feelings, like exercise for the mind is super, super important. And, garbage in, garbage out as well. Treating your body well, treating your mind well, all this stuff is super important. And these are habits. And so that is my alternative to zero tolerance policies in school. I agree that zero tolerance policies don't work. They have been proven to not work, because what happened in my school is people just had the fight off school property. And so your trip home was terrifying. Instead of being at the school, they wait until you get off school property, where the school will turn a blind eye to it, not just not do anything, but go, it's not our problem. And so, you were afraid to walk home because you might get jumped. That's all zero tolerance policies do. And no one's more aware of that than me. That's not what I was talking about. I was talking about it's something of a moral panic that's going on in Canadian schools right now, where boys are seen as learning in fundamentally different ways than girls are. And this fear of the fact that in some minds, education has become too feminized. And I don't even know how to address that complaint, because I don't even know what that means. And it's one of these terms that people just pass around, where education has become too feminized and everybody nods respectfully, but no one actually defines what the term means. I have no idea what that means, other than girls overall in standardized tests do better than boys overall in standardized tests. And I'm going to link to a lengthy article on this subject that does have footnotes and citations and all this stuff. It's done from a quarterly journal about best practices in education. But the the thing that statistic, and this is not in these footnotes, it's referenced, but the direct thing, the fact that girls overall do better than boys is only part of the statistic. The full statistical picture, at least a more full statistical picture, is the fact that the upper percentiles are still more male than female. So more boys than girls do exceptionally well. But then the lower percentiles are also more male. So boys are more likely to have either great success or great failure, whereas as girls tend to hang around more the mushy middle. So, acceptable outcomes without excellence kind of thing. And doing very well in school and being top of your class are very different things. I was second in my class. And it ticked me off because the reason the person above me was higher grades is they did summer school and upgraded their marks. And where I was, it was easier to get good grades in summer school because it was this compacted course. And so they take a class and then they take a class again. So they got a do-over. And it annoyed me, but I was sort of like, okay, well, and nobody wants to be in second place, right? But I was one of those upper percentile achievers. And let me tell you, it was like me and 5 guys. And that's not true of all. I mean, I'm the exception that proves the rule, right? But so this idea that education is failing boys across the board, one statistic says it is, one statistic says it isn't. And this is the issue that this article very thoroughly and in a nuanced approach deals with. The fact that it is, you guys will love this, not all boys, that they have identified that socioeconomic conditions beyond gender have a greater there is a greater correlation. This article is very clear that correlation is not causation. But they found that things like race, socioeconomic, like low-income neighborhoods, boys were less likely to do well in school. And the problem apparently is there just isn't enough research, period. And so this idea that the boy crisis in schools is a thing is based on a relatively small number of studies. In some cases, one study was so small that it was something like 5 girls and 9 boys or something like that. That was a sample size. It was a sample size of 14 people. But this got picked up by the media and, everybody ran wild with it. And there was a push to have schools based on race and schools based on gender and all this stuff. All boy classes, all black classes, everything like that. And then, of course, the head of the Toronto District School Board, who was spearheading all these programs, was caught doing shenanigans and resigned in disgrace. So there's a real issue with the credibility of current knowledge. And all we can really say for certain involving brain sex differences at this point is that we need more research, and we can't ignore the research. We have to process the research and not just cherry pick or be afraid of it because of politics. But the research and this is what I was referring to with boys will be boys, the research that they're basing it on, which may or may not be true, is that the idea that boys need to run around. They have to be more kinetic in their learning than girls. And everything I've read has said that there is more differentiation in learning style among groups of boys and among groups of girls. So 2 girls will be more different than the average boy and the average girl. 2 boys will be more different than the average boy and the average girl. It's a complex soup. And it's that the question we have to ask ourselves is our children learning? I believe that was a Bushism, but it's far more complicated than this the thing I called boys will be boys approach to learning makes it seem. And it goes back to that whole thing. In order to address the boy crisis in schools, we need to address poverty. And in order to address the girl crisis that we're seeing in society, we need to address poverty. It all comes back to poverty, or especially the working poor. So hopefully, because like I said, I feel like this commenter is speaking from a place of trauma. And even though I would prefer they hadn't come at me accusing me of harmful opinions, because we all know how I feel about that, I felt like it was worth addressing that comment just because I felt like it came from a place of deep personal trauma. And so with my remaining time, I'll try to briefly address the Let's Talk stuff that I did. It was just kind of fun. People seem to like the picture-in-a-picture stuff. The processing, the editing on that is a big pain in the ass. I'm still trying to refine it, but, working on it. We'll get there. One person asked, and this is the last thing I'll address, what it means to validate feelings. They seemed very perplexed by this idea of validating feelings. And what it means is that a lot of people have their emotions dismissed. A lot of people, when they express a feeling, it's you're being too sensitive, grow a thicker skin, all that stuff. It is making the feeling seem invalid. It is, crazy talk. It is not an understandable response to the situation. And what that does is creates a cycle where people try to avoid their feelings because feelings are inherently bad. And that means that people become more controlled by their feelings in a way that is unhealthy, because accepting and, being able to identify your feelings is something a lot of people take for granted, but certainly in the cycle of addiction and things like that, we see a lot of people who don't know how to effectively have uncomfortable feelings. And there's a whole thing about level of validation. And this is, like I said, this is mental exercise. You start by really listening to someone. You follow up with being able to say to them, what I understand from you is that you feel scared or you feel angry, kind of like what I did with that last comment. It's what I understand is this is a deeply personal trauma for this person. And, so I am going to validate that element, even though it came with behavior that I feel is not acceptable. I can validate the feelings. And that's the whole sort of process. And some people do have traumas that allow them to, that cause them to respond in less than logical ways to certain circumstances. And it's important to recognize that even though the trauma is unusual, they had something not normal and not okay happen to them. The emotions that come out of that trauma are very human and very understandable. And in a lot of ways, if they're handled properly, very healthy. And that's what I meant. And I see a lot of unhealthy emotional processing going around nowadays. And so I try to do things in a different way. I try to do things in a way that I find is more productive, because that's the core to, I believe, a respectful disagreement. I don't accept the way you came at me, but your feelings are understandable. Let's take the heat down. Let's take the pressure down. Let's take the temperature down and try again. And that might be something I do on Next Tatas Tuesday. I didn't have time to get to as many comments I'd like on the stuff about the Women's March. Some of these issues, including the, religious arguments surrounding abortion are a video in themselves. And so that might be something I tackle next week. I have to decide whether I want to wade into that. But I'll leave it there. Have a great weekend. Back on Monday with Momo Monday.